Module 4. Corrections. Probation. Probation is a sentence that allows a convicted person to remain in the community instead of going to prison. In exchange for probation, the convicted person must agree to certain conditions, such as not committing any new crimes, staying away from drugs and alcohol, and paying restitution to the victim. If the convicted person violates any of the conditions of their probation, they may be ordered to serve the remainder of their sentence in prison. Probation is often used to rehabilitate offenders and keep them out of prison. It can also save the government money, as it's less expensive to supervise an offender on probation than to incarcerate them. There are two main types of probation: supervised probation and unsupervised probation. With supervised probation, the convicted person will be subject to the supervision of a probation officer. The officer will meet the convicted person regularly to check their progress and ensure that they comply with their probation conditions. If the convicted person violates the conditions, the probation officer may recommend that they be sent back to prison. With unsupervised probation, the person will not be subject to the constant supervision of a probation officer. However, they are still subject to the conditions of their probation. And again, if they violate those conditions, they can be sent back to prison. The decision whether to grant probation is made by the judge, who will consider several factors, including the severity of the crime, the offender's criminal history, and the offender's likelihood of reoffending. Probation can be a valuable tool for rehabilitation and crime prevention. However, it's not appropriate for all offenders. If an offender is likely to reoffend, probation may not be the best option. Restitution is a court-ordered payment made by a convicted offender to the victim of a crime. The purpose of restitution is to compensate the victim for their financial or emotional losses. Restitution can be ordered in addition to other punishments, such as jail time or probation. Restitution is a condition of probation very often, in which the offender repays society or the victim of the crime for the trouble caused by the offense. Another aspect of probation is day fines, which are monetary sanctions based on the offender's daily income. The amount of a day fine is determined by a formula that considers the offender's income, the severity of the offense, and the offender's criminal history. Day fines are typically used with other forms of punishment, such as probation or community service. Restoration. Restorative justice is a process that aims to repair the harm caused by the crime. It involves bringing together the offender, the victim, and other affected parties to discover the crime and its impact. The goal is to resolve acceptable solutions and ideas to all parties that helps repair the harm caused to the satisfaction of everybody. Restorative justice is often seen as an alternative to the traditional justice system, which is often seen as too focused on punishment and retribution. Restorative justice is based on the belief that crime is not just an offense against the state, but also against the victim and the community. By bringing the parties together, restorative justice seeks to heal the harm caused and prevent future crime. United States versus Granderson. United States versus Granderson was a case the United States Supreme Court decided in 1994. The case concerned the constitutionality of revoking probation solely because the probationer cannot pay the fines associated with the probation. The case was brought by Granderson, who was sentenced to probation after being convicted of drug possession. Granderson could not pay the fines associated with probation, and it was revoked. He appealed the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that his due process rights had been violated. The Supreme Court agreed with Granderson, ruling that it's unconstitutional to revoke probation solely because the probationer cannot pay the fines. The court held this would effectively punish the probationer for being poor and violate the probationer's right to due process of law. The court's ruling in Granderson has been cited in subsequent cases and has helped protect probationers' due process rights. The ruling has also challenged the constitutionality of other financial penalties imposed on probationers, such as restitution payments. The case is significant because it clarifies the rights of probationers under the Constitution. The ruling has helped to ensure that probationers are not punished for being poor and are given a fair hearing before their probation can be revoked. The case also has implications for the justice system as a whole. The ruling suggests that the government cannot use financial penalties to coerce probationers into complying with the terms of their probation. This could have a significant impact on the way that probation is used in the United States. A Justice of the Peace, or Commissioner of Oaths, is a public official empowered to administer oaths, issue warrants, and perform other duties. The governor or another high-ranking official typically appoints justices of the peace, and they serve in local communities. The justice of the peace is responsible for helping to maintain the smooth functioning of the law and order system in his or her jurisdiction. The qualifications to become a justice of the peace vary. However, they typically include being a citizen of the United States, being at least 18 years old, and being a resident of the state where you're applying. Some states also require justices of the peace to have a law degree, or at least to have completed some legal training. Prisons and jails. Assimilation in prison is the process by which new inmates learn the rules and norms of the prison environment. The process can be complex and challenging, as inmates must adapt to a new and often hostile environment. Several factors can influence the assimilation process, including the inmate's age, race, gender, and criminal history. Inmates who are younger, white, and have a history of violence may have more difficulty assimilating into prison culture. The prison environment is often characterized by violence, drug use, and gang activity. Inmates who adapt to this environment and form relationships with other inmates are more likely to assimilate successfully. Prisonization is the process by which the inmate adopts the norms, values, and behaviors of the prison culture. This process can make inmates more aggressive, violent, and withdrawn. Prisonization is a form of assimilation. The term prisonization was first coined by Donald Clemmer in his 1940 book, The Prison Community. Clemmer argued that privatization is a process of social assimilation that occurs when the inmates are forced to adapt to the norms and values of the prison environment. Congregate prison system. A congregate prison system is a type of prison system in which inmates are housed in large dormitories or cells. The system is often used in overcrowded prison, with many inmates with mental health or behavioral problems. In a congregate prison system, inmates work and eat together during the day and then sleep in solitary cells at night. There are several advantages to using a congregate prison system. First, it's more cost-effective than other types of prison systems. Second, it allows for the more efficient use of space. Third, it can help reduce violence and disturbances in the prison. However, there are also some disadvantages. First, it can be more difficult to maintain security in these types of environments. Also, there's a greater risk of spreading disease in these types of prisons. Preventive detention. Preventive detention is the practice of holding someone in custody before they have been convicted of a crime. This can be done in cases where the authorities believe that the person is a danger to themselves or others, and or likely to flee before their trial. There are several reasons why preventive detention might be used. Sometimes it may be used to protect the public from someone dangerous. For example, a person accused of a violent crime, such as murder, might be detained to prevent them from committing further violence. In other cases, preventive detention might be used to ensure that a person appears for their trial. For example, a person accused of a serious crime might be detained because otherwise they would flee, given the fact that they're facing such a possible long prison sentence. Laws requiring that certain dangerous defendants be confined before trial for their protection or their community are called preventive detention statutes. Preventive detention is a controversial practice. Some people believe it's essential for protecting the public and ensuring justice is served. But applying what amounts to punishment before conviction may violate the rules involving due process of law. Prison life. The medical model is a way of thinking about crime and criminals, treating crime as a disease. This model views criminals as mentally ill or otherwise impaired, suggesting they should be treated rather than punished. The medical model has been around for centuries, and it was trendy during the years 1960 to 1980 with the rise of the field of criminology. Criminologists who subscribe to the medical model believe that various factors, including mental illness, substance abuse, and environmental factors, cause crime. They argue that criminals should be treated for their underlying conditions rather than punished, as punishment is unlikely to change their behavior. The medical model has been influential in the development of criminal justice policy. For example, many prisons now offer treatment programs for inmates with mental health problems. Additionally, some jurisdictions have adopted diversion programs that allow people with mental health problems to avoid jail time by participating in treatment programs. However, the medical model has also been criticized. Some argue that it's unfair to label criminals as mentally ill, as they point out that many criminals don't have any underlying health problems. Additionally, critics argue that the medical model can be used to justify the overuse of incarceration, as it can be seen as a way to treat criminals rather than to punish them. Pharmacological treatment. Pharmacological treatment, or pharmacotherapy, or drug therapy, refers to treating disease by applying medications. It can be used to prevent or treat a disease's development and alleviate the pain and symptoms of a particular condition. Pharmacological treatment is considered a drug treatment rehabilitative program. Pharmacological treatments are often used with other treatments, such as psychotherapy or counseling. They can effectively manage various conditions, including mental health disorders, chronic pain, and substance abuse. There are several different types of pharmacological treatments available. Some of the most common types include antidepressants, which are used to treat depression and other mood disorders, antipsychotics, which are used to treat schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders, anxiolytics, which are medications used to treat anxiety disorders, pain relievers, which of course are medications used to relieve pain, and stimulants that can treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and narcolepsy. Pharmacological treatments can be effective in treating a variety of conditions. However, they can also have potential for side effects, such as weight change, nausea, and digestion problems. Fines. Fines are a common form of punishment in the criminal justice system. They're used in various cases, from traffic violations to felonies. They can be used as a standalone punishment or combined with other punishments, such as probation or jail time. There are several reasons fines may be used in the criminal justice system. They can be used to compensate the victim for their losses. For example, someone convicted of stealing a car may be ordered to pay the victim the car's value, though this can also be referred to as restitution. Second, fines can be a way to deter crime. If people know that they'll be fined for breaking the law, they're less likely to do so. Finally, fines can be used as a way to raise revenue for the government. However, there are also some drawbacks to using fines in the criminal justice system. First, fines can disproportionately be burdensome for poor people. A fine that amounts to a small amount for a wealthy person can be a significant hardship for a poor person. Second, fines can be challenging to collect. A person who cannot afford to pay a fine may be sent to jail. This can create a cycle of poverty and incarceration. There are several ways to address these drawbacks of using fines in the criminal justice system. One way is to ensure that fines are proportional to the offender's income. Another way is to offer payment plans for people who can't afford to pay a fine in full. Finally, it's essential to ensure that fines are collected in a way that does not create a cycle of poverty and incarceration. House arrest. House arrest is a form of punishment in which the offender is confined to their home. They can leave their house only specific reasons, such as work, school, or medical appointments. House arrest is often used as an alternative to jail time, and it can be an effective way to punish offenders while allowing them to maintain their jobs and family relationships. There are several ways to enforce house arrest. In some cases, the offender may be required to wear an electronic monitoring device that will track their movements. In other cases, the offender may be required to regularly check in with a probation officer. House arrests can be problematic punishments to enforce. Offenders may try to violate the terms of their house arrest by leaving without permission. They may also try to tamper with their electronic monitoring devices. However, there are several ways to prevent offenders from violating their terms of house arrest. The Martinson Report. The Martinson Report, officially titled What Works? Questions and Answers About Prison Reform, was a 1974 report by Robert Martinson that concluded that there was no evidence that correctional treatment could reduce recidivism rates. The report was highly influential in criminology and led to a decline in the use of rehabilitation programs in prison. The Martinson Report was based on a review of 231 studies of correctional treatment programs. Martinson found that there was no consistent evidence that any type of treatment program was effective in reducing recidivism rates. He concluded that nothing works in terms of rehabilitation. The Martinson Report was met with a great deal of criticism. Some critics argued that the literature needed to be reviewed and revised. They pointed out that many of the studies that Martinson reviewed could have been better designed, and that the results of the studies often were not entirely consistent with each other. Furlough. A furlough is a temporary release from prison for a specific purpose. Furloughs are often granted to inmates nearing the end of their prison sentence and with an excellent disciplinary record. Furloughs might be granted so inmates can be released to work in the community during the day and return to prison at night. There are several reasons why an inmate might be granted a furlough. Some common reasons include a funeral, job training, education, medical treatment, and visiting a sick or dying relative. Furloughs can be an essential tool for helping inmates reintegrate into society after their release. They can help inmates maintain their relationships with their families and friends, and they can help inmates prepare for life outside of prison. However, there are also some risks associated with furloughs. Some inmates may use their furloughs to commit new crimes. Others may not return to prison after their furlough is over. For this reason, furloughs are often subject to strict rules and regulations. Inmates who are granted a furlough may be required to wear an electronic monitoring device, and they may be required to check in with a parole officer regularly. Rapists and prison life. Rape is a severe crime and is seen as one of the most heinous acts a person can commit. In prison, rapists are often shunned and isolated by other inmates. They're seen as unwelcome in a mainstream inmate society and have few companions. This is because rape is seen as violence against the weak, violation of trust, and cowardice. As a result, rapists are often isolated and shunned by other inmates. They may be threatened or attacked and have difficulty finding protection. They can make it difficult for rapists to survive in prison and make it even more difficult for them to rehabilitate. Unofficial inmate behavior codes may prohibit inmates from associating with rapists, and inmates caught associating with rapists may be punished or ostracized by other inmates. Prison security levels. Prisons are classified into 4 security levels: minimum, low, medium, and maximum. The security level of a prison is determined by several factors, including the severity of the crimes committed by the inmates, the risk of escape, and the need for security. Minimum security prisons are the least secure type of prison. They're typically used to house inmates who are considered to be low risk, such as those who have committed non-violent crimes or have a history of good behavior. Minimum security prisons often have open dormitories, and inmates may have more freedom of movement than inmates in higher security prisons. Low security prisons are more secure than minimum security prisons, but are still considered relatively low risk. They typically house inmates who have committed more serious crimes, but are not considered an escape risk. Low security prisons often have cell blocks, but inmates have more freedom of movements than inmates in medium or maximum security prisons. Medium security prisons are more secure than low, typically used to house inmates who have committed more severe crime, such as drug offenses. Medium security prisons often have cell blocks, and inmates have less freedom of movement than in minimum or low security prisons. Maximum security prisons are the most secure. These are typically used to house inmates who have committed murder or terrorism. Maximum security prisons have high walls, barbed wire, and armed guards. Inmates are often kept in solitary confinement and have minimal freedom of movement. A super maximum security prison uses high-level security measures to incapacitate the nation's most dangerous criminals. The security level of a prison determines and is based on the level of risk that inmates pose to themselves and others. It also determines the security level to protect inmates from violence and escape. The security level can also affect the type of programming and services available to the inmates. For example, minimum security prisons may offer more educational and vocational programs than higher-level security prisons. The security level is also essential for the staff who work there. Staff in maximum security prisons must be trained to deal with high-risk inmates and equipped with the necessary security measures. Inmate population. The term inmate population refers to the number of incarcerated people in a prison or jail. Inmate populations can vary depending on several factors, including the country, the state, the type of prison, and the crime rate. The United States has the highest inmate population in the world. As of 2021, over 2.3 million people were incarcerated in the United States, about 655 per 100,000 residents. The United States has a higher incarceration rate than any other developed country. The inmate population in the United States has been increasing steadily for decades. Several factors have contributed to this increase, including the war on drugs, mandatory minimum sentences, and the three strikes law. The drug war has significantly increased the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses. In 1980, there were about 40,000 people incarcerated for drug offenses in the United States. By 2021, that number had increased to over 450,000. Mandatory minimum sentences require judges to sentence offenders to a certain amount of time in prison, regardless of the circumstances of the offense. Mandatory minimum sentences have been criticized for leading to incarceration of people for relatively minor offenses. The three strikes law is a law that requires judges to sentence offenders to long prison terms or even life in prison if they're convicted of a third felony. The three strikes law has been criticized for being too harsh and disproportionately affecting people of color. The increase in the inmate population has led to several problems, including overcrowding, violence, and the spread of disease. Overcrowding can make it more difficult for prisons to provide adequate facilities and services to inmates. Violence is a severe problem in many prisons, and it can lead to injuries or deaths. The spread of disease is also a problem in prisons and can be challenging to control. Several solutions have been proposed to address the problem of increasing inmate population. Some of these include reducing mandatory minimum sentences, reforming the three strikes law, and legalizing marijuana. The issue of increasing inmate population is a complex one, and there's no easy solution. However, it's essential to address this issue to improve the conditions in prison and reduce the number of people who are incarcerated.